Our need to control is a shadow that leans over every moment of our day-to-day lives. And it comes forth from the fear that we each have of death. The need to control is a compulsion that places significant burdens on us, and it leads us ultimately to harm ourselves and harm each other in a vain attempt to try to keep death at bay. Given where I find myself at middle age, I am thinking a lot more about death these days. There are some things that are not going to happen again for me in life already. I don't know how long I will live, but I might be closer to the end than the beginning at this point. And beyond that, circumstances of people who I love in my life have brought it rather close these last few years. Many of you in the course of conversation during the past year or more might have asked me how I'm doing, and you probably heard me share something about how Sarah and I have been carrying a lot, particularly from the fact that 3/4 of our children's grandparents are in the midst of severe health problems related to cancer and Parkinson's disease. And I suppose that in this world, sometimes death is sudden. Someone that we love is taken away from us far too soon. But what I've been witnessing is something different, a slow hollowing and uncomfortable grinding down, an unstopping loss in capacity that moves and fits and starts. Sometimes those changes are almost imperceptible, and sometimes they're strikingly swift. For each capacity, doesn't care. And each thing that's lost along the way is not going to be recovered. There's no mending on the horizon. In American culture, we do what we can to keep death out of our field of vision. We keep the aged and the sick and the dying neatly tucked away. Our culture celebrates, makes idols of the fleeting qualities of youth, beauty, productiveness, and ableism, as if these things will never, ever wear out. These efforts to keep death hidden are an attempt at control, because what we don't see can't hurt us, right? At least until it does. I've reflected some during these times about how hospitals, for instance, are like an entirely different world than the one we ordinarily live in. You hope to not find yourself there, but once you're sucked in, you're subject to strange counter rhythms. Hospitals just have a different physics. Time moves differently, priorities are altered. And yet this world is always running parallel to our own every day. It's just that we usually avoid it and are blissfully unaware. But the truth is, that world in some ways is more real than the one that we choose to inhabit most of our lives. We've developed tools to keep ourselves oriented in the realm of positivity, infinite health and ability, and unending success. And in fact, much of our lives are directed by the need to control, the need to appear as if we are in charge, we are self-sufficient, we are independent, and we have it all together. We are not going to end up sick and disabled, homeless, or vulnerable, exposed or reliant on other people. Only other people end up in those categories. So much of our efforts in life and careers and relationships and personal finance are directed by our desire to control, to insulate ourselves as much as possible from loss. And this is really just an attempt to keep death at bay, to avert our gaze, to live in denial of certain inevitabilities. And the pressure that death puts on our anxieties is there nonetheless, no matter how we try to paper over the cracks. Here in chapter 19 of John, Pilate is driven by his need to be in control, or at least to keep up appearances that he is in charge. His compulsions to control prevent him from being truly present to the injustice that he is participating in. They prevent him from truly apprehending the significance of his actions, and they close off for him any freedom to make choices contrary to what presents itself by political expediency. In his lust to be in control, he is fully controlled, closing his eyes to any genuine alternatives. Read with me starting in verse 7 of chapter 19. The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have the power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at the place known as the stone pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said in this passage. "Don't you realize that I have the power to free you or to crucify you?" Pilate wants Jesus to know that he is in control. He holds the power of life and death. And yet, we're told here also that he's afraid. What is he afraid of? Why is he afraid? As the reader, we know that he's anything but relaxed in this situation. He's not confident and self-assured as he exercises his authority over the fate of his captive. He's insecure, he's shaken, and everything that he does from here is motivated by that insecurity. He's compelled by the need to tame chaos and restore his own sense of status quo equilibrium, to recover the appearance that he is the one in charge. Pilate clearly doesn't see Jesus as a real threat to his administration or to Roman interests, but his level of fear suggests that he has some intuition that Jesus is no ordinary prisoner, that something bigger than he can apprehend is unfolding here. "Where do you come from?" he asked. Surely he knew that Jesus was a Galilean. That's not what he's asking. Pilate is also determined that the Jewish leaders understand that he is in control. They show formal deference to him, but the whole time they are trying to manipulate him to get the outcome that they desire. Who is really in control here? The gospel author informs us that Pilate's desire is to let Jesus go free, and yet he doesn't act on that desire. Does that sound like someone who's in control? He can't find a way to escape from the manipulations of the Jewish leaders. They say, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar." Jesus had already said to Pilate in chapter 18 that my kingdom is not of this world. And Pilate seems to accept this at face value, and he declares that he finds no basis for a charge against Jesus. And yet, ultimately, he goes along. He'd rather expend an innocent life than give the Sanhedrin cause to complain to his boss that he wasn't adequately working to prevent an insurrection. But resentful of the Jewish leaders for forcing his hand, he gets a dig in at them. "Here is your king. Shall I crucify your king?" What do we give up when we feel compelled to maintain the illusion of control? For Pilate, he gave up any real freedom he had to impact events for good, to bring justice. He abdicated responsibility in order to save face, to preserve his status and the appearance of authority. For the Jewish leaders, they got what they wanted but they were forced to shame themselves, confessing what no earnest, observant Jewish person could assert. We have no king but Caesar? They would have known by heart so many psalms that speak to the contrary, like Psalm 29, the Lord sits enthroned over the flood, the Lord is enthroned as king forever. How could they assert with a straight face they have no king but Caesar? They felt compelled to do what they had to do to get what it was that they wanted. Here lies a great irony that when we seek to control at all costs, we actually lose freedom. We become compelled by events and controlled by our fears and desires. In trying to protect ourselves from death and vulnerability, we simply become more subject to it. So, what am I saying here? Should we go about life in a completely passive way? No, God has given us agency, and he expects us to partner with him for the good of the world. But we have to acknowledge that there are many things in this life that we just don't control. When we experience our lack of control, the need to accept outcomes that we do not want, it can feel like 1,000 slow steps towards death. But we can face this, the Christian story teaches us, by learning to take up our cross, choosing to believe that there is power in the grain of wheat that falls to the earth and dies. And when we do this, we not only acknowledge the limits of our own power and control, but we make space for other people, and we invite God to meet us in the midst of our weakness. Rather than trying to avert our eyes from death, attempting to hide from vulnerability, rather than striving to manipulate or deceive in order to not lose status or suffer pain and death, we live a healthier life when we acknowledge that we have limits. We are limited by death and 1,000 other things, confined to a time and place, embodied in less than perfect bodies, impotent to change many things that we earnestly wish were different about ourselves, our parents, and our children, and the larger geopolitical world around us. So how do we cope with all this? We can fight for the good and yet be ready to lose. We can commit ourselves to prayer, inviting God to reveal his presence with us in the midst of the things that we do not want but have to bear. And we can mourn. Mourn with those who mourn, mourn for all that we see that is not as it should be. My mother-in-law, Sue, is not going to recover from Parkinson's. My father-in-law, Tom, has incurable multiple myeloma cancer. But far from a fruitless pursuit, mourning is a holy protest of these things that Sarah and I and the kids are bearing in our lives. And in it, we unite with the heart of Jesus and keep vigil until that day that Jesus comes again to make all things well. And until that time, as we mourn, we faithfully bear the torch of God's intent for the world in the face of everything that seems to relentlessly contradict it. By keeping this vigil in the midst of continued injustice and evil, we keep nihilism, cynicism, and hopelessness in check. And we bear into the world the presence and possibility of hope. So tonight, on Good Friday, we remember that Jesus died a human death. In Jesus, we don't have a God who is unable to sympathize with our weakness. Rather, we have someone who has shown us the way into and through suffering, death, and loss. He looked into the face of everything that we fear and all that we cannot control, and he moved towards it and accepted it upon himself. And he showed us, ultimately, that it's okay. We don't have to keep the ruse up that we are in control and that we have our act together. We can lose. We can let go. We can disintegrate. Our desire to control is a manifestation of power. And confronting the human relationship with power is something that Jesus had square in his sights throughout his ministry. Just today, I read an article in The Atlantic by Peter Werner stating that Good Friday signifies that human power is ephemeral. All states, empires, and grandiose claims are transitory. And there is comfort in that. In the article, he also stated, Jesus said his kingdom was not of this world. The last shall be first, the meek shall inherit the earth, and the greatest in heaven will be the lowliest on earth. His words were an extraordinary inversion of expectations. But the greatest declaration, listen to this, of anti-power, the antithesis of worldly power and worldly victory, was the crucifixion of Jesus. That is the counterintuitive power of the cross that shines through the darkness of death. Death will have its day, but its power has been curtailed. Jesus surely guides us forward into that dark unknown. Jesus, the one who accepted death on a cross to become first fruits from the dead, to whom death and every power and authority must be subject. So in the midst of all our struggle, our weakness, our doubt, our loss, and even as we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we move forward in hope, awaiting the day when God will swallow up that shroud of death forever and wipe away the tears from every face. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.